You were my tutor quite some time ago now.
Yeah.
We've known each other a long time. But when you were a student, you bunked off college once, didn't you?
Yes. Well, that was to see Bing. Bing Crosby.
Where was that?
I was at Goldsmiths, and Alexander and I saw in the paper that he was in Paris.
Who's Alexander?
Alexander Plunkett Green was at Bryanston with me, and he was an absolutely wonderful, amazing character, enormous charm and wit. He set up Mary Quant, was behind her. So we told our girlfriends that we were going to go and see him, and I think they were a bit sceptical about that. Eventually, we met him on the pavement, 100 yards up from the Ritz, because the gendarme was sent for because we were considered a nuisance. And then we saw him in the distance. And Alexander said, that's Bing Crosby. He came walking towards us, and Alexander, who was over 6 foot tall, put his arm across the thing and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Crosby, could you spare us a few moments?" And he said, "Why, sure, boys, who are you and where are you from?" We loved it because various people who'd complained about us were sort of saying, "Hi, Bing," and so on, and he ignored them and entirely talked to us. So he took us to his apartment and for hours played us the endless Louis Armstrong and particularly Ella Fitzgerald records. And my father died when I was 12, so...
What did he discover, John?
Asbestosis, the disease from asbestos. And if his instructions in 1935 had been carried out, scores of thousands of people would have been saved the most terrible deaths. Workers working on asbestos and people putting it in buildings and so on. But not the slightest attention was paid to it, like people saying now that atomic things are so safe, and they bloody well aren't.
I mean, that's where you've got your interest in natural history and being a scientist.
Well, he certainly got me interested in animals from a very, very early age, because when even from the age of 2, he took me to the London Zoo every Sunday. And it was a fascinating time, because you'd get, keepers would all come out and talk with one, and there were all sorts of amazing people, like the wolf man who went and walked in the wolf enclosure with them.
Can we talk a little bit about Edward Borden?
Yes, of course.
How did you first meet Edward Borden?
Well, it was marvellous, what Americans would call happenstance in a way. That the art master at Bryanston, where I went, he wrote out of the blue to Edward Borden, because he realised that he lived quite near to where I lived in those days, where my parents' house. And I was 17 at the time, and I got a phone call from Edward Borden saying would I go and see him.
Yeah.
And I didn't know who he was from Adam, and I went to a Braintree bookshop and got a book on him. In my stupidity, schoolboy stupidity, I didn't really like the things very much in the book. But I went to see him and was absolutely captivated. They asked me to supper, stay to supper. Was absolutely captivated by him. Everything in the house was sort of designed to him, the wallpapers, the curtains, loads of pictures up everywhere. And, I found him absolutely fascinating and very funny. He had an extremely naughty sense of humour, often teasing people. And he loved to make people uncomfortable. It was one of his favourite things. And then he would laugh, sort of silently to himself as he saw their discomfort. There was a couple whose house burnt down in Bardfield, and typically Charlotte Borden invited them to stay at their house until things were a bit settled. Edward Borden had been at Royal College when it burnt down, and he said, I had a dreadful, I was so upset to miss the fire. It would have been a splendid sight. Might have made a good design out of it. I'm so sorry I missed it. The wife burst into tears, ran from the room. Charlotte shrieked and swore at Edward. She was so angry at this. And he just did his inward laugh. That was just like Edward. He made these shattering remarks and then would go sort of like that.
What did you grow to love about his work, John?
Well, the line, the wit, beautiful sense of colour, just everything about it, really. It's comment on life, on everything, on buildings, on people, on landscapes. So, you could sort of turn his talents to anything.
Yeah, multi-talented.
Multifaceted, yeah. Designing garden furniture, designing wallpapers, ceramics, beautiful stuff for Wedgwood. All kinds of things. There's marvellous watercolours, endless illustrations for books, just everything.
My personal interest is the work that he did in Basra.
Yeah, of course.
As an official artist for the Ministry of Defence. And I've been to the same places. Incredible area. Yeah, this sort of area.
Yeah.
With a water buffalo.
Yeah. Edward loved the Arabs there, and he drew them, as you know. And he told me they'd never ever look at the drawings because it was against their religion.
Well, I've seen the drawings in the Imperial War Museum.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're beautiful.
Yeah, they are wonderful.
Very sensitive.
Yeah.
Going back in a few weeks.
Are you?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Back to Iraq and to see what's going on, but also looking at the ancient history of the place with the Americans this time.
Yeah.
Which is going to be quite different. Than,
Will be different.
I like the Americans though.
Oh, I love them, actually. I mean, I've had so much kindness and generosity from Americans.
Yeah. I mean, you've been to the States, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, I lived there for 2 years. And worked there with Julie, yeah. Travelled extensively in the States to wildlife areas and to some marvellous areas, sort of Indian reservations. Had a wonderful time in the Okefenokee Swamp, paddling around in a tiny canvas canoe amongst the alligators. But alligators are very unaggressive, and they tolerated me as long as I was paddled around quietly amongst them.
You like reptiles, John, don't you?
Yeah, I love them.
What did Edward Borden think about you drawing reptiles?
John, why do you draw those repulsive reptiles? Draw cats like me, and you'll sell every single one.
And he did an exhibition, one of his exhibitions, every single picture had a cat in it. And of course he sold everyone.
People like cats and dogs. Cats more than dogs.
I love dogs much more than cats. I think they're much more interesting, far more intelligent. And much nicer. I love them. They're tremendous emotional life. They live at a tremendous emotional tendency. Whereas I don't think cats do at all. I mean, cats are all right, but I don't like the way they go out and kill birds and mice and things. Dormice, which I've got here, which are very rare and special.
What's so interesting about reptiles for you, John?
Their pattern, their colours, their character, in that they are so remote from us. Though I have a tortoise that goes for walks with me, follows me all around the garden and everywhere. I find they respond if one talks to them. I know it sounds funny, but I only gradually, over the endless years, found that out, but it is so. I don't say I understand everything one's saying, but they like the tone of voice, and they respond.
Are they hibernating, your tortoises, now?
Well, some baby little ones aren't, because I don't risk it. And I've had such a problem with rats.
Are they inside, or are they...
When I hibernated them out of doors, they killed all my breeding colony. 15 tortoises they kept alive.
How many have you got now?
I've only got about, well, of all species, about 20. And I had way over 100.
Do you have snake still?
No.
No?
No, he died, but I'd kept him much longer than London Zoo or anywhere, that I know of. The people at the zoo said it was extraordinary. It was one actually that was given me by the London Zoo. If you were going to show anything publicly, that shouldn't be said, because probably the head keeper shouldn't have done it. Lovely bloke.
Can we talk about your conservation work and your thoughts about the state of the environment, which you're very passionate about?
Yes.
You were an early activist, really, weren't you?
Yes, well, when I was about 4, my father took me to a talk by that great man, I don't know if you've heard of him, called Grey Owl, who was actually a schoolboy from Hastings who had always had marvellous fantasies about the Indians. And he was brought up by two maiden aunts. He used to be out the whole time pretending to be an Indian and so on. And then aged 17 he ran off to Canada and lived with the Indians. Reprehensibly he became a trapper, but he married an Indian girl called Anhero, and she loathed the trapping that he did and convinced him of its brutality and turned him into a passionate conservationist. And he set up one of the first Canadian wildlife parks, a huge place. And his idea was to protect the Indians and to protect the wildlife. Absolutely extraordinary. I have no time for people who say he was a fake. I think he turned into an Indian, just as a caterpillar turns into a chrysalis and comes out seemingly entirely different as a butterfly. I think he turned into an Indian. He spoke their language. He was elected Indian chief and given the name Grey Owl. And he worked passionately for the Indians and for wildlife. And I remember coming back and having my bath, and my dear old nurse was amazed to hear me whistling, and it was because I'd heard him whistle when he gave the lecture, and I'd never whistled before. And I suddenly found I could. We set up the first conservation society, I think, certainly in any art school, 40 years ago. But I know it was the first.
And what was it? What was it called?
It was called the Ecology Study Group, Group O.
Well, you've had a huge influence on, not just myself, but so many
Well,
other
it's very kind of you
emperors.
to say so. Several students of mine have had new species named after them, which is rather exciting.
John, where are we going?
What do you mean, where are we going?
The human race.
Oh, towards extinction, and sadly I think taking all the other species with us, which is the biggest crime. But I mean, in my relatively short lifetime I've seen such havoc and destruction, terribly destructive species.
Are we all like that?
No, not everybody, of course.
Artists aren't.
No, I don't think most of them aren't. But I think the conceptual ones probably are. I mean, I think their work is absolutely appalling.
Do you like Damien Hirst, John?
Loathe it, you know.